Good morning, everybody. My name is Melissa, and as Lee mentioned, I am currently the head of special collections and archives here at Kelvin Smith Library. And I think this presentation is going to be a nice complement to the one that came before, because I actually am going to be talking about herding students in the direction of library and archival science, specifically audio engineering students. And I'm pretty new here at Case Western, so I'm actually going to be talking to you about a project I did about a year ago when I was at Southern Illinois University, where I was the rare book librarian. Are there any rare book librarians in the crowd? We've got one. Yeah, hi, Erica. Anybody else? Yeah, we all know each other, right? Yeah, we're kind of a dying breed, and accordingly, well, we're in a rich and thriving profession, but kind of a dying breed. Accordingly, the project I'm going to talk to you about today has nothing to do with rare books, but I do think that as a case study, it's an interesting example of how the technical toolkit that we develop as librarians and archivists can be especially relevant and useful in a somewhat atypical instructional context. And that context is Radio and Television 463, Sound and Art Practice 2. This was an undergraduate course at SIU, and still is an undergraduate course at SIU. The course description is up there. I won't read it to you, but I think it's clear that this is a high-level media production class. It's specifically designed for radio and television majors, and this is basically a class for students who want to go on to careers as professional audio engineers. So you may now be wondering what I was teaching them about library science, and I'm actually going to have one of the students answer this question, and this is a quote from a student, and I do apologize, I am going to read this. "The preservation of sound is an integral procedure done to archive recorded works of our past. There are two major steps in preserving an audio piece. The first would be recording the metadata, which is used as description for the selected piece. The other major step is transferring the audio from an old audio format to a digital format, which is used to make the audio easier to listen to without destroying the original format of the audio. Here at SIU, I assisted in the preservation of a reel recording from the 70s. And it's always so gratifying when you ask a student to tell you what they learned, and they actually tell you what you were trying to teach them. This is exactly what we wanted them to learn. We wanted them to learn about the preservation of audio, about the importance of digitization in the preservation of audio, and then we wanted to learn how to actually do it, the digital capture process, the metadata, the value of metadata in preservation. And then we actually had them come in and do it. So before I tell you a little bit more about our methods and our outcomes in this project, I want to tell you how it got started. This was a complete collaboration from start to finish between myself and these two fabulous individuals here. Jay Needham is an associate professor of radio and television at SIU, and Julie Mosbo, who was then the preservation librarian and an assistant professor at SIU. She is now the head of preservation at Texas A&M University Libraries. So Julie and Jay and I had been working together for years when we came up with this project, and so I could now impose a sort of theoretical, pedagogical framework around what we were doing, but that would be a bit disingenuous. This was honestly the kind of project that comes up, between close colleagues over cappuccino. We thought this would be a fun sort of thing to try with Jay's students, and so we tried it. And this is the design for the instruction unit for this course. So RT 463 was a 3-hour weekly seminar style course, and we did the preservation unit over a series of 4 weeks. First week, we did tours of special collections and our digitization lab. We did a set of lectures on audio preservation, on digitization, on metadata and copyright. And then in the second session, we had conversations with the students about the creative reuses of audio. And after that, we had each of the students come into the lab one-on-one and work with either Julie or myself to actually digitize a reel. And we had them go through the exact steps that we used in the lab every day. So they picked up a reel, they threaded it, they did the digital capture, they created the preservation master file, the mezzanine file, the access file, and they created complete metadata records for these, including authorized name and subject headings. And these specific reels, this will be relevant later, were from the 1970s. They were recordings from the WSIU radio station, public radio station at our university. And after they did all of this, we had them write a little sort of reaction essay, which basically told us what they learned. It was very much for our own assessment purposes. And then we held a roundtable discussion with the students, which was actually not just for the class, but it was open to faculty both from the radio and television department and from the library. And that kind of helped us tease out some of the ideas that the students were bumping up against as they worked through this material. And I just want to point out one more thing on the instructional design before I move on. You can see that we heavily front-loaded the actual lecture piece before we did the hands-on piece. We thought they should understand the concepts before they come in and do the hands-on work. I'm going to come back to that, which is why I'm calling it out now. So as I said, we just thought this would be a fun thing to try, but we did have goals going into it. So I'm going to talk about how well we think we achieved those goals. Our first goal, and before I say this, I want to mention, I apologize for how text-heavy these slides are. All of the slides you're about to see include actual quotes from the students. I wanted to give the students a voice here, but I won't be reading these to you. So our first goal, this was Jay's goal. He wanted his students to learn about alternate careers for students with audio engineering skills. So he wanted them to be aware that audio preservation is a thing, that it's something that people do, and that it's actually sort of a growing field, and that his students might consider this as an option. And here I think we were incredibly successful. All of the students we worked with got what we do in audio archives, they got why we do it, they saw it as interesting and complex, and they thought it was important work. So again, this was probably our most successful outcome in terms of meeting our actual goals. We also wanted students to consider creative uses of archival audio. Jay himself is very interested in this as a research method. He wanted to introduce his students to the ideas of working with archival audio and have them have the experience in the archive so that if they ever needed to go on to do creative work using archival sound, they would kind of be able to speak the language of archival audio. We were less successful here. We had a couple of students mention these kinds of ideas in their essays, but when we pressed them on it during the roundtable discussion, we didn't really get much of a response. And I think that might have something to do with the specific recordings that we chose. Again, these were interviews from a campus radio station. They were primarily interviews with university administrators, faculty talking about their research, student government officials. And the students were very interested in them from a historical perspective, but they may not have been the most inspiring recordings. So if we were going to do this again, focusing on creative use, I might choose different recordings in the future. Another goal was to encourage students to learn about personal preservation. This was one of Julie's goals. In the preservation community, people are very concerned about, how are people working toward preserving their own work? How are they helping us toward building archives for the future? And we were very successful here as well. During the discussion, the students had a great conversation about, hey, as a student, I'm creating all this work. How am I saving it? I never thought about that again. What metadata am I creating? They actually came to these ideas on their own, and we were really pleased about that because we never explicitly introduced the concept of personal preservation. It was something they came to on their own as they were sort of working through the material. And our final goal was my goal. I like to actively engage students with archival material through the curriculum as a special collections librarian. And again, here we were incredibly successful. One of my favorite quotes from all of the essays is this last one here. This guy, he said he didn't understand why anyone would want to preserve recordings from the 1970s going into this. He thought they would be outdated and irrelevant. And then he came in and listened to his recording, and he started making all these connections between campus life in the 1970s, campus life today. And so by the end of this essay, he's actually sort of outlining a research project that he wants to do using these recordings. And although I don't think I ever used the term primary source throughout this entire instruction session, the students totally grasped that concept by doing this work. And so in our discussion, they even started talking about, hey, all this material now is being captured and recorded on mobile devices. Who's archiving that? Who's preserving it? How will researchers in the future be able to access that material to learn about our culture? And again, this is an idea that they came to on our own. We didn't introduce that to them. So that was great. So those were our explicit goals, and I think we were more or less successful with those. We had a couple of other positive outcomes that were not what we expected. First of all, is the students just loved it. They loved doing this. I mean, they were just overwhelmed by it. I especially like this last quote here. Everything I learned doing this project, I can use in my everyday life and in the future. What more can you ask for as an instructor? That's boom, and then we also had some students apply what they learned more or less immediately. We had one student who went to his church and digitized some historic recordings for them after he learned how to do this. And this isn't captured in one of our essays, but we had one student who worked for a different campus radio station, WIDB, who learned that they still had all of their archival recordings. He arranged to have them transferred to the university archives, and he even offered to do the digitization work to preserve them and provide access to them in the future. So the collection benefited from this project as well. So that was another great outcome. We were really pleased about seeing the students use what we were teaching them. Moving on to lessons learned. I mentioned that we front-loaded the instruction portion before the hands-on portion. Again, we thought that was a good idea, teach them the concepts and have them apply the concepts. I wouldn't have done it that way. So many of the students told us during the discussion that they didn't understand why we were trying to teach them about preservation. They didn't understand why we were trying to teach them about metadata. They thought it was totally tedious and boring. They were dreading coming into the lab because they thought it would be totally tedious and boring. And then they came in and they got so excited. And by the end of it, after they did the hands-on work, they were more excited about metadata than any library science student has ever been. Seriously. So I definitely would have flipped that. If you guys are playing the flipped classroom drinking game that we learned about during the plenary, you can all take a shot now. I definitely would have flipped that classroom. And I think that the students would have learned a lot more about preservation concepts if we had done the lecture after the hands-on portion. So that's how I would do it differently. And then another lesson that was just for me personally, I am often that librarian who is saying in a sort of cantankerous manner, students shouldn't have to learn library science to use the library. I want to create a frictionless experience for students in the library and in special collections in particular. But this experience really showed me that learning a little bit of library science can be fantastic for students, especially when it's presented in a context that is meaningful and relevant to them. And I don't have any assessment data to capture this, but I truly believe that these students learned more information literacy skills than any students I have ever taught. So that was fantastic. And that's all I've got for you guys today. I thank you for your attention, and I will welcome your feedback or your questions along with my colleague Diane. Thank you.